opportunity.
I think the disappointing thing is if he was going for a huge reduction in tax, then he should have gone for council tax, which is the one that's so unfair and oppressing so many people across the country, as opposed to trying to grab the headlines while he grabs the money in hidden taxes elsewhere.
At times, this felt like a pre-election budget. Gordon Brown is certainly setting the stage for his move next door. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
Now, to find out who wins and loses after all the tax cuts, the tax rises, the credit changes, it's no use, frankly, listening to the budget speech. You actually have to look in here. This is the Treasury's book of budget stats, hundreds of pages of them. And then you have to feed all those facts into a mighty computer. Now, happily, that isn't my job. It is Hugh Pym's.
The budget box had big changes for working people up and down the country, but they're complicated. A cut in income tax, an increase in the lower rate, and higher national insurance bills for the better off. So how will Mr Brown's complicated changes affect people? An individual earning £14,000 a year can expect to pay £90 a year more in tax and national insurance, but claiming working tax credit will more than offset that. Someone on £25,000 a year will pay £128 a year less, while a higher earner on £43,000 will be hit by the national insurance change and pay £20 more. So what about spending on the public sector, including schools? After bumper increases in recent years, the Chancellor made it clear the next spending round would be much tighter. Schools like this one in Bristol have appreciated the cash boost up until now.
There's always the request for more money, there's always the request for more resources, but the reality is, if I take the situation here in Bristol, for instance, every secondary school will have been rebuilt by 2010.
There was a green tinge to the budget. As predicted, Mr Brown is clobbering drivers of gas-guzzling vehicles like some 4x4s with a big hike in road tax. There'll be a cut for the most fuel-efficient vehicles. There was a budget boost for business. Corporation tax paid by companies will be cut by 2%. That was good news for shares and gave them something to smile about in the city dealing rooms.
The city, of course, positively reacts to that. It's good for company profits. They'll be taxed at a lower rate. So, unsurprisingly, the first reaction on the equity markets was to go higher.
All in all, it's a neutral budget. The Chancellor giving with one hand and taking away with the other. It's worth remembering the overall tax burden on the economy has gone up from 35% of national income just before he arrived at the Treasury to more than 37% now. That's his legacy as he prepares almost certainly to move from number 11 to number 10 Downing Street later this year. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
Nick, the Chancellor certainly took us all by surprise today, didn't he?
Oh, he certainly did that. And the great joy of surprise for Chancellors, it doesn't just take people like me by surprise, but it also wrong-foots your opponent. So you saw David Cameron leap to his feet. He had less than a minute's notice when he spoke. First of all, he hailed a tax cut, and then later the Tories branded it a tax con as they did the figures and said, in fact, there was no tax cut there at all. And that really is the story of today. Imagine if he hadn't made any of these tax changes, George, because in truth, he had no money to give away at all. What would we have been talking about? We would have been talking instead about the tightest public spending settlement in more than a decade, what that would mean for lower pay rises, difficulties in hospitals, tight budgets even in schools where he was more generous today. Instead, he's distracted us with the talk of tax cuts and tax reforms, and I think he'll be pretty pleased with that.
And Nick, one word of caution. We don't always learn everything about a budget, actually, on budget day.
Oh, yes, I showed you that book. We were going through that book minute after minute, hour and after hour. People who are much cleverer than me are now still running it through computers to see who gains and who loses. Another note of caution, of course, is that we get very excited about budget days, and a few weeks later, none of us can really remember what was in them. But, and this is an important but, even though at home, when you calculate your figures, you may forget today, economically not much might have changed, budgets are also about politics. And the reason the Chancellor has a smile on his face today is he believes he's made the political weather for almost the first time since David Cameron became the Tory leader, and is now putting them on the spot, on spending, on tax, on borrowing and the like. And that, with the figures he's had in the polls recently, that goes down as a net gain.
Nick, thank you.
Now, one more thing the Chancellor put in the budget was more help for employees who lost their pensions when their companies went bust before 2005. They'll get an extra £6 billion, but the pensioners' representatives weren't impressed.
It's based on a core pension, which I don't fully understand what a core pension is. I doubt whether some of my colleagues do. It's capped, and I don't know what level the new one is. It's also not index linked, which is vitally important. If you win something back, you've got to have it forever, not watch it dwindle away again.
Pensioners' representatives. Well, there's a ready reckoner on how the budget could affect you. It's on our website, and there's going to be more reaction to the budget later on in the programme.